In 1932, America was collapsing. Banks were failing. Factories were shutting down. 1 out of every 4 Americans was unemployed. Men stood in bread lines while entire towns slowly died around them. Families lost their homes. Children went hungry. The stock market crash of 1929 had destroyed everything people thought was stable and safe. And inside a struggling company called Ford Motor Company, Henry Ford made a decision that most people thought was insane. He wanted to give ordinary Americans a V8 engine. Not a luxury car engine, not a race engine for millionaires. A real V8. Cheap enough for working people. Affordable enough that a factory worker could walk into a dealership and drive out with 8 cylinders under the hood. At the time, that sounded impossible. Because in the early 1930s, V8 engines were exotic, expensive, complicated. They belonged in Cadillacs parked outside country clubs. In Lincolns driven by bankers and oil tycoons. Cadillac had one, Lincoln had one. Packard offered them to the wealthy elite. But average Americans? They drove slow 4-cylinders and flathead 6s that barely made enough power to climb a hill with the windows closed. Engines that wheezed and struggled under load. Engines that took forever to reach highway speed. The idea of putting V8 power into an affordable car seemed like fantasy. But what almost nobody knows is, Henry Ford's gamble didn't just create a successful engine. It accidentally unleashed hot rodding, changed NASCAR forever, inspired the muscle car era, and rewrote American car culture for the next 100 years. And the craziest part? It was never supposed to happen that way. Most people think the Ford Flathead V8 was just another old engine from the Depression era. Something your grandfather talked about. A relic from black and white photographs and grainy newsreels. They have no idea what this thing really did. Because this wasn't just an engine. It was the spark that lit the fire. In the late 1920s, Ford was in trouble. The legendary Model T had once dominated America. At its peak, Ford controlled over half the automobile market. But by 1927, it was outdated, slow, primitive. The competition had caught up and then surged ahead. Meanwhile, competitors like General Motors were offering smoother engines, better styling, and more modern cars with actual comfort features. Chevrolet was stealing market share every single month. Buyers wanted refinement now, not just basic transportation. Ford needed something revolutionary, and Henry Ford hated following trends. He despised copying competitors. He wanted to leapfrog them entirely. So instead of improving a 6-cylinder engine like everyone expected, Ford engineers started working on something far more ambitious, a low-cost V8 for the masses. There was just one problem. Nobody knew how to build one cheaply. At the time, V8 engines were incredibly difficult to manufacture. Most used complex multi-piece castings that had to be carefully assembled, expensive machining processes, tons of skilled labor, precision work that drove costs through the roof. That's why luxury brands charged huge money for them. A Cadillac V8 cost more than many people earned in an entire year. But Ford engineers, led by Charles Sorensen and a team of stubborn metallurgists, attempted something radical, a single-piece cast iron block. Simple in theory, a nightmare in reality. The Flathead V8 used a 221 cubic inch displacement. That's 3.6 liters in today's terms. Bore measured 3.06 inches, stroke came in at 3.75 inches, and compression ratio was just 5.5 to 1. Tiny by modern standards. Today's engines run compression ratios twice that high. But in 1932, this thing was a monster. It produced 65 horsepower and around 130 pound-feet of torque. Today, those numbers sound laughable. Modern minivans make triple that power. But back then, Ford's 4-cylinder Model A made only 40 horsepower. Chevrolet's 6-cylinder made about 50. This new V8 was smoother, faster, stronger, and shockingly affordable. The problem was actually building it. You see, casting a Flathead V8 block as one piece created massive cooling and manufacturing problems. Molten iron didn't flow evenly through the complex molds. The internal geometries were incredibly difficult to get right. Internal sand cores shifted during the casting process. When that happened, wall thicknesses became uneven. Cracks formed around the valve pockets. Water jackets didn't line up properly. Entire blocks became worthless scrap metal. Ford reportedly burned through millions of dollars trying to make it work. And remember, this was during the Great Depression. Every dollar mattered. Shareholders were furious. Accountants were panicking. Competitors were laughing, convinced Ford was wasting money on an impossible dream. At one point, engineers were failing so badly that insiders thought the entire project would be canceled. Henry Ford would walk through the foundry, staring at piles of cracked blocks, and his face would darken. Engineers held their breath. Jobs were on the line. The company's future hung in the balance. But Henry Ford refused to quit. And then the real breakthrough happened. Instead of placing valves above the cylinders like modern overhead valve engines, the Flathead used a side valve design. The valves sat beside the cylinders inside the block itself. That made the engine physically compact, simpler to assemble, and much cheaper to manufacture. No complex valve trains, no push rods, no rocker arms, just simple direct valve actuation. From a production standpoint, it was brilliant. It also created one enormous problem: heat. The exhaust ports traveled directly through the block, wrapping around the cylinders in tight, cramped passages. Temperatures skyrocketed around cylinders 5 through 8. The back cylinders ran hotter than the front ones. Thermal stress became a constant issue. Cracks became common. Cooling systems struggled constantly. Radiators had to work overtime. Mechanics complained that the engine ran hot even under normal driving conditions. One mechanic later described overheated flatheads as steam kettles with pistons. Water pumps failed. Thermostats stuck. Head gaskets blew. Coolant boiled over on hot summer days. Owners learned to carry extra water in the trunk. But despite all that, Americans loved them because suddenly ordinary people could afford V8 power. A 1932 Ford with the Flathead V8 cost around $460. Adjusted for inflation, that's still remarkably cheap for what you got. That changed everything. For the first time in history, working-class Americans had access to affordable performance. Not pretend performance. Real power. Real speed. The kind of acceleration that pushed you back in your seat. And they immediately started modifying them. This is where the story gets wild, because Ford accidentally created hot rod culture. Young mechanics returning from World War II discovered something important. Military surplus parts and lightweight old Fords made the Flathead incredibly fast. The war had trained thousands of young men in mechanical skills. They'd worked on aircraft engines, tank engines, and military vehicles. They understood metallurgy, machining, and performance tuning. When they came home, they looked for cheap thrills. And they found them in junkyards full of old Fords. Strip weight out of a 1932 Ford Coupe. Add high compression heads, dual carburetors, and open exhaust headers. And suddenly this humble little engine became terrifying. By the late 1940s, racers were extracting over 150 horsepower from flatheads. Some dry lakes racers in California pushed even higher. Some claimed 200 horsepower from highly modified versions. That was more than double factory output, more than most expensive luxury cars of the era. Teenagers were building cars that embarrassed Cadillacs. But there was a problem. The Flathead hated high RPM. Oil starvation became a nightmare above 4,500 revolutions per minute. Bearings failed constantly. The three main bearing crankshaft flexed dangerously under sustained load. At sustained high speeds, oil pressure dropped like a rock. Rod bearings overheated. Pistons cracked from heat buildup near the exhaust passages. Connecting rods bent. Blocks cracked between cylinders. Racers learned to rebuild engines constantly. Mechanic Vic Edelbrock reportedly said, "You learned real quick where the weak spots were." And there were a lot of them. Every racer had stories. Engines that grenaded spectacularly. Pistons that punched holes through blocks. Crankshafts that snapped in half. Oil fires from failed bearings. It was dangerous, expensive, and completely addictive. But Americans didn't care. They kept pushing harder. Companies like Edelbrock, Offenhauser, and Iskandarian Racing Cams built an entire aftermarket industry around fixing the Flathead's weaknesses. High-flow aluminum heads reduced heat and improved breathing. Bigger carburetors improved airflow dramatically. Aggressive camshafts helped the engine breathe at higher RPM. Racers drilled extra oil passages into the block just to keep bearings alive. They installed higher volume oil pumps, stronger valve springs, lightened flywheels, ported and polished every passage they could reach. The creativity was insane. Some guys machined custom intake manifolds in their garages. Others fabricated multi-carb setups using parts from completely different engines. Ignition systems got upgraded with aircraft magnetos. Fuel systems borrowed ideas from racing motorcycles. Most people don't realize this was the birth of American performance tuning. Before the Flathead, there really wasn't a massive speed parts industry in America. A few specialty shops existed, sure, but nothing like what came after. After the Flathead, the aftermarket exploded into a multi-million-dollar business. And then NASCAR entered the picture. In the early days of stock car racing, the Flathead dominated. Moonshiners in the American South loved Fords because the V8 made escaping police easier on rough back roads. Fast acceleration, good low-end torque, durable enough to handle dirt roads at high speed while loaded down with heavy cargo. That's not a joke. A lot of early NASCAR drivers literally learned racing while outrunning law enforcement with modified flatheads loaded with illegal whiskey. Junior Johnson, the Flock brothers, Curtis Turner. These men learned to drive fast because their freedom depended on it. If the revenue agents caught you, you went to jail. So they learned to drive faster than the law. The Flathead made that possible. At the first official NASCAR strictly stock race in Charlotte in 1949, multiple Flathead-powered Fords filled the field. The engine's torque and durability made it perfect for dirt tracks and long-distance racing. Dirt ovals rewarded low-end grunt more than high RPM power. The Flathead excelled there, but by the late 1940s, competition was evolving fast. And suddenly, the Flathead looked old. The side valve design restricted airflow badly. Exhaust gases trapped heat inside the block instead of evacuating quickly. Compression ratios couldn't climb much higher without detonation destroying pistons. Meanwhile, overhead valve V8s from Oldsmobile and Cadillac started making serious power with modern designs. The 1949 Oldsmobile Rocket 88 introduced a high-compression overhead valve V8, making 135 horsepower straight from the factory. That was a massive leap forward. No modifications needed. Just turn the key and go. Flathead racers panicked, because even heavily modified Flatheads struggled to keep up with stock Oldsmobiles. The writing was on the wall, so Ford engineers tried squeezing every last ounce of performance from the old design. By 1949, displacement increased to 239 cubic inches. Horsepower climbed to around 100 in stock form. Some Mercury versions reached even higher torque numbers. Special high-compression heads appeared, better carburetors, improved cooling systems, but physics was catching up. The Flathead's fundamental architecture simply couldn't compete anymore. Overhead valves allowed higher compression, better breathing, more efficient combustion. The future belonged to overhead valve engines, and then disaster struck on the racing circuits. At higher speeds, the cooling problems became absolutely brutal. Cracks formed between valve seats and cylinders. Overheated engines warped heads so badly they couldn't be machined flat again. Bearings failed during long races, sometimes spectacularly. Racers started carrying complete spare engines in their transporters because failures were so common. One driver reportedly joked, "If your Flathead survived Sunday, you bought it dinner." Winning meant rebuilding constantly. Racing teams worked through the night replacing engines. Mechanics became experts at complete teardowns in hours instead of days. But even as the engine became obsolete in competition, its cultural impact exploded. Because by then, America was completely addicted to speed. Hot rods filled California streets every weekend. Teenagers drag raced on dry lake beds in the Mojave Desert. Returning veterans used mechanical skills from wartime aircraft maintenance to modify engines at home in tiny garages. Speed shops appeared in every major city. Magazines dedicated to hot rodding started publishing. Car clubs formed. Racing associations organized events. An entire subculture emerged. The Flathead had accidentally trained an entire generation of gearheads who understood that ordinary people could build fast cars. And that changed American car history forever. Think about it. Without the Flathead, does the muscle car era even happen? Does NASCAR become what it became? Do aftermarket giants like Edelbrock, Holley, and Crane exist in the same way? Do kids in garages across America learn to modify engines the same way? Probably not, because this engine taught Americans something dangerous. That speed could be affordable. That performance wasn't just for the wealthy, that you could take a cheap car and make it fast with your own hands and your own brain. And the car industry noticed. By the mid-1950s, Detroit was locked in an all-out horsepower war. Chevrolet introduced the legendary small block V8 in 1955, and it changed everything. Chrysler unleashed the Hemi with massive power potential. Pontiac, Buick, and Oldsmobile joined the battle with their own high-performance V8s. Horsepower numbers exploded year after year. And every one of those companies understood the same thing Ford accidentally discovered back in 1932. Americans didn't just want transportation anymore. They wanted performance. They wanted identity. They wanted noise and smoke and the thrill of acceleration. And they wanted power they could afford. The Flathead created that demand. It proved the market existed. It showed that regular people would pay for performance if you made it accessible. Ironically, Ford itself nearly got left behind in the horsepower wars it accidentally started. By 1954, Ford finally replaced the aging Flathead with the overhead valve Y-block V8. The old side valve design simply couldn't survive the modern era. Emissions were becoming a concern. Compression ratios were climbing into double digits. Speeds were increasing on new interstate highways. The Flathead's time was over. After producing millions of units across multiple displacements over more than 2 decades, including 136, 221, 239, and 255 cubic inch versions, Ford quietly ended production in America by the early 1950s. Some industrial and foreign versions continued a bit longer, but the automotive era had ended. And yet, the legend never died. Hot rodders kept building them for decades. Racers kept modifying them long after they became obsolete. Collectors started hunting original 1932 Ford coupes powered by flatheads. The Deuce Coupe became an icon. Beach Boys wrote songs about them. Movies featured them. Today, authentic, high-quality 1932 Ford coupes can sell for hundreds of thousands of dollars. And the aftermarket never disappeared either. Even now, almost a century later, companies still manufacture flathead speed parts. Aluminum heads, intake manifolds, performance cams, complete rotating assemblies, entire crate engines built to original specifications or better, not because the Flathead is the best engine ever built. Honestly, it wasn't even close. It overheated easily. Airflow was terrible compared to overhead valve designs. High RPM durability was questionable at best. Oil systems were marginal. Modern overhead valve engines destroyed it technically in every measurable way. But that's not why people remember it. They remember it because of what it started. Because this rough, flawed, noisy little V8 gave ordinary Americans their first real taste of speed. Their first experience with power. Their first chance to build something fast with their own hands. And once that happened, there was no going back. You can hear the Flathead's echo in old drag strips where teenagers still race. In NASCAR's origins and the legends born from moonshine running. In every muscle car burnout at a traffic light. In every teenager wrenching on a project car late at night in a cold garage, learning the same lessons mechanics learned 80 years ago. The DNA traces directly back to the Flathead. Every aftermarket part, every modified engine, every kid who learned that cars could be more than transportation. The Flathead started all of it. That's why this story matters. The Ford Flathead V8 didn't accidentally change American car history because it was perfect. It didn't revolutionize anything because it was the most advanced or sophisticated engine ever designed. It changed history because it made performance accessible. Because it turned speed into something regular people could touch, build, race, and dream about. Because it proved that you didn't need to be wealthy to go fast. And in doing that, it created an entire culture that still thrives today. A culture of builders and dreamers and racers. A culture that believes any car can be made faster. That believes horsepower is a right, not a privilege. That believes the best car isn't the most expensive one, but the one you built yourself. That culture exists because of a flawed, overheating, oil-starved V8 that Henry Ford built during the worst economic disaster in American history. And almost a century later, we're still talking about it. If you enjoyed this story, let me know in the comments what engine or forgotten piece of automotive history you want to see next. And make sure to subscribe for more deep dives into the machines, rivalries, and engineering decisions that change the automotive world forever.